the tragic kingdom before Belgium. Tonight, we drift back through foggy fields and candlelit workshops to a land that had not yet given itself a name. Not Belgium, not yet, but Flanders, Brabant, not Liege. A tangle of cities, languages, and loyalties where church bells tolled for curfew and silk banners hung over squares, soaked with rain and revolution. This was a land of looms and lords, of artisans with red hands and dukes with rings of ruby and wax. A place that breathed trade, spilled secrets, and marched toward a history both glittering and grim. Tonight, we will walk its crooked alleys. We'll listen for the hammering rhythm of cloth stretched and clipped. We'll feel the weight of chainmail over linen, and we'll step quietly into the painted silence of Burgundian courts. For quiet scenes, for glimpses into a forgotten kingdom, before it fractured, before it faded, before it became the Belgium we know today. So let the day fade, let the noise of the present dim, and let the weaving of time begin. Segment 1: Why you wouldn't last a day in medieval Ghent. Not all cities are born in stone. Some, like Ghent, were woven thread by thread, loom by loom, until the clatter of wooden machinery became its heartbeat. Imagine you wake to damp linens and the echo of a church bell, calling not for prayer, but to remind you that curfew has lifted and the day's quotas have begun. You are a weaver, not a master, not even a journeyman, just another pair of hands in the vast, chattering machine that is cloth production in Flanders. The room where you work is narrow and cold. The shutters don't quite close. There's a scent of wet wool and charcoal smoke, and the air trembles with the dull rhythm of treadles and shuttles moving back and forth, back and forth. Your fingers are sore before the sun fully rises. The quota today is high. If your numbers fall short, you risk more than a rebuke. Your name could go to the guild magistrates, and the fine they issue would be more than you earn in a week. Down the alley, a neighbor was fined for using thread not stamped with a proper dye. The inspector scraped it with a knife and claimed it faded too quickly. Now he scrubs pots for a baker. You think of this as you weave, tightening each thread with the care of a scribe copying scripture. The streets outside offer no relief. They are slick with yesterday's rain. Horses splash past, pulling carts weighed with bales of rough linen. A procession of red-hatted guildsmen mutters by. Each carries a small ledger. You look away. One wrong glance could be seen as a challenge. And yet there is pride. For all the hardship, Ghent is alive, buzzing with markets, colored with tapestries, glinting with coins struck from Bruges mint. There are rumors in the taverns of kings needing Flemish cloth, of ships leaving for England filled with bolt after bolt of Ghent's finest weave. Your work matters, even if your name never will. At night, the church bells toll again, not for prayer, for curfew. The sound echoes down the alleyways like a soft warning. Shutters close, candles dim, the loom goes silent. You lay down, not in peace, but in exhaustion. The day was long, tomorrow will be longer, and still, you do not complain, because you were born into this cloth, and you will likely die wrapped in it. Segment 2: The Battle of the Golden Spurs. The year is 1302. And the land feels heavy with tension. Fields once quiet are now lined with pikes and prayer. Soft earth soon to be trampled. But let us step backward first, before the noise, before the banners. The kingdom of France, towering and proud, had grown uneasy with the boldness of the Flemish towns. Cities like Bruges and Kortrijk had grown fat on wool, rich with trade, loud with independence. Too loud, French nobles looked upon these merchant cities with suspicion and perhaps with envy. Kings prefer loyal vassals, not mayors and guilds who bow to no crown, and so came the soldiers. Silken-sleeved knights from the south, their spurs polished, their horses fed better than most men. They came to teach the cities a lesson, to remind them who ruled. But Flanders did not bow easily. On July 11th, in the low meadows outside Kortrijk, the lesson was reversed. The army of the towns was strange. No lords, no knights, just artisans, apprentices, and guildsmen, men who traded wool by day, but who had now taken up pikes, axes, and flails. They were barefoot, some wore leather aprons as armor, some had never held a weapon until weeks before. But they knew these fields, they knew the marsh, the ditches, the sluggish canals, and they had been planning. As the French cavalry charged, the ground betrayed them. Their horses sank in the soft earth. Their formation broke, and the Flemish lines, grim and unmoving, closed in. It was not a swift fight, but it was decisive. When the grass had stilled, the golden spurs of hundreds of fallen French knights were collected from the field and hung in a church in Kortrijk like strange, gleaming fruit. The battle would come to be known as Golden Sporenslag, the Battle of the Golden Spurs. And while it did not end the wars, it reminded Europe of something forgotten, that towns could rise, that merchants could fight, that dignity did not always ride a horse. In the years that followed, the spurs were stolen, rehung, and lost again. But in the memory of Flanders, they rang like bells in soft earth, a symbol not of victory, but of defiance, quiet, practical, stubborn, just like the people who had raised the pikes in the first place. Segment 3, the vanishing manuscripts of the Dukes of Burgundy. Some treasures are made of gold, others are made of silence. In the shadowed halls of Burgundian palaces, amidst the velvet and glass, there once existed a collection of books so magnificent, so vast in knowledge and beauty, that scribes whispered of it like a miracle. They called it simply the Ducal Library, and now it is gone. Let us return for a moment to Dijon, sometime in the mid-1400s. The court of Burgundy was not a dusty relic. It was alive, buzzing with poets, scientists, painters, and theologians. Their patrons, the dukes Philip the Bold, John the Fearless, Philip the Good, each more lavish than the last. They collected books as if they were precious metals, volumes on astronomy, medicine, history, prayer, not merely copied, but illuminated, every page brushed with gold leaf, each capital letter curled like a vine. There were over 900 volumes, handwritten in Latin, Greek, French, some bound in crimson velvet, others locked in chests carved from walnut and iron. The library itself, likely kept in the palace of the dukes in Dijon or in Bruges, was more than a room. It was a statement that Burgundy was not merely a court of dancers and silks, but of ideas. And then somehow it vanished. No one knows precisely when the library began to fade. Some say the wars of religion scattered the volumes. Others believe invading troops, French, Habsburg, or even Napoleonic, looted the shelves, one manuscript at a time. Many books were sold quietly, exchanged in back rooms for debt or favor. Some found their way to libraries in Vienna, Paris, or Madrid, their bindings recut, their provenance erased. Some may yet sit on forgotten shelves, their pages turned by hands unaware of the ghosts they hold, and many, perhaps most, were lost to fire, rebellion, revolution. War each came with flame, and parchment, however divine, burns quickly. Occasionally, a book resurfaces. A catalog appears in an auction house in Amsterdam. A folio turns up in the back of a Jesuit archive, and scholars lean close, whispering Latin to themselves, checking the ink, the corners, the symbols. Is it from the Burgundian collection? They look for clues, a note in the margin, a ducal crest faded under centuries of dust. But the truth is, the library itself as it once existed is gone. What remains are fragments, echoes, and a longing that something so quietly magnificent could have disappeared into the world, without so much as a sound, like parchment ash on the wind. We've walked through alleys, we've stood in mud, and we've stared into firelight reflected on pages. Now, let us step once more into the warm halls of power where robes whispered across stone, and plots brewed under the polished beams of noble ceilings. Segment 4. The opulent court of Philip the Good in the heart of Burgundy. When the wind softened and candles shimmered in cut glass holders, a different rhythm of life unfolded, not of looms and guilds, but of whispered politics, slow banquets, and satin-soled shoes. Here, at the court of Philip the Good, power wore perfume. Philip, Duke of Burgundy, ruled not a country, but a collection of finely stitched provinces stretching from the forests of the Ardennes to the canals of Flanders. He was not a king in name, but in spectacle he far outshone many who wore crowns. His court in Bruges, and sometimes Lille or Dijon, was a world of chandeliers, tapestries, and long tables. The ceilings were carved in oak, and the floors were layered with reed mats, so soft that footsteps disappeared into them on cold evenings. Guests would gather beneath canopies embroidered with lilies and lions, servants moving silently, pouring mead or Rhenish wine into goblets rimmed with silver. They ate slowly. Courses arrived with a measured grace of dancers. First a soup thick with almonds and herbs, then salted fish, baked pears, spiced pheasant, everything scented faintly with cloves, the rare spice that passed through Venice and Bruges like whispered treasure. And yet, for all the indulgence, the court was not merely about food or fabric. It was about performance. Philip cultivated a world where poets could dine beside knights, where composers were paid in coin and praise, and where skalds and scholars brushed sleeves with spies. He founded the Order of the Golden Fleece, not a knightly order of conquest, but of noble lineage and courtly decorum. They wore collars of twisted gold, and met in solemn halls to speak, mostly, of unity, piety, and inheritance. At night, in the corners of the great halls, there were shadow negotiations. Dukes discussed dowries, clerics murmured about France, and from the edges, young pages listened and learned how power could be folded neatly into a velvet glove. Outside, in the city, carts creaked over stone. Bells rang curfew. Snow piled at the corners of markets. But within the court, a hush reigned, the kind of quiet born from wealth, from expectation, from knowing that the world tilted slightly on the whims of men who read poetry at breakfast and wrote treaties by candlelight. The legacy of Philip the Good would outlast the shine of his halls. But it is here, in these softly lit rooms, that the pulse of the kingdom was kept steady, measured, elegant, and very still, as we prepare to close this chapter and leave the scent of rosewater and roasted goose behind. Let us now gently return to the present where peace is not enforced by lords, but chosen by silence. Let the world around you begin to still. Loosen your shoulders, ease your breath, and close your eyes if they wish to close. Tonight, you'll drift not through dreams alone, but through a distant world, a land of long winters, frozen rivers, and slow-burning kingdoms made from wood, blood, and borrowed gold. This is a quiet journey through the history of a place that would one day be called Russia. But in its beginning, it had no such name. It was simply Rus, a patchwork of trading posts, timber fortresses, and belief systems as shifting as the northern winds. You won't find certainty here, but you will find rhythm in sled tracks across snow, in the cadence of law spoken beneath wooden rafters, and the subtle pulse of a people building something permanent from something impermanent. This story begins not in a palace, but in a market, not with an emperor, but with a man cold to the bone, his hands cracked from bark and ice. So let us begin where most lives began, with labor. Why you wouldn't last a day in Novgorod, but imagine yourself waking to the sound of wind slapping against a plank wall. The fire you banked last night has gone to ash. Your breath is visible in the gray morning light as you swing your feet down to boots, still stiff with frost. This is Novgorod, sometime around the 10th century. Not a city as we know it, but a fortified settlement strung together by paths of frozen mud, market stalls covered in thatch, and 1,000 small fires fighting the endless cold. You're a fur trader, though your profits are not your own. What you trap, you owe, first to your clan, then to the boyars who rule from their timber halls, and lastly, to the farm merchants who arrive each spring with iron, salt, and expectations. The animals here are both prey and predator. Sables, stoats, and foxes bring in coin. But the woods beyond the river are thick with wolves that do not fear men. Sometimes they howl in the night from so close you think they've come for your children. You sleep with a blade under your hay-stuffed mattress, just in case. Your home smells of pine resin, wet fur, and boiled cabbage. The stew is always thin. The walls are never thick enough. You live with the knowledge that firewood burns fast and frost bites faster. The local vetch, or people's assembly, gathers often to settle disputes, but more often to enforce taxes. And if you cannot pay in coin, you pay in hides. If you cannot pay in hides, well, then your barn may mysteriously burn in the night. You know who did it. You say nothing. The markets are full of noise. Finnic traders, Norse-speaking Russ, Slavs from the southern forests. They argue in dozens of tongues, but coin and anger are understood universally. Every spring, a group of Varangian warriors returns from the rivers, bearing silver from the caliphate and stories soaked in exaggeration. They swagger through the muddy streets, dripping with foreign silk and local arrogance. You avoid them. Religion here is still a strange mix. Some families place crosses in their homes. Others leave bread at the foot of ancient trees, whispering words older than writing. You do both, just in case. Because in Novgorod, belief is not a system. It is a shield. And one never walks into the woods without a shield. Night falls quickly here. The last rays of sun flash off the ice crusting your hut's roof. Inside, you light a thin candle and wrap yourself in the same cloak you wore all day. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, you'll paddle upriver with your son to check the trap lines again. If the weather does not hold, you'll patch the holes in your roof and hope the wolves find someone else. This is not a romantic place. It is not built for comfort, but it is home, and in the stillness of its cold, you can hear the earliest breath of what will one day become an empire. Segment 2. The Baptism of Vladimir the Great. Let us leave the cold huts behind now. Let us climb slowly, steadily into the world of palaces. Not marble palaces, not yet. These are halls of carved wood and bear pelts, where warriors drink from silver and kings are made by oath and blood. It is the late 10th century. And the man before us is Vladimir, ruler of Kievan Rus, a warlord by birth, a tactician by nature, but now curiously, cautiously a man looking for something greater than victory. Vladimir was not born to rule. His father, Sviatoslav, was a relentless campaigner, spending more time on horseback than in chambers. When he died, he left behind not just land, but rivals, brothers, cousins, clans. Vladimir fled to the far north, gathered support among Norsemen, and returned with steel and certainty. By sword, he reclaimed Kiev. By strategy, he kept it. But rule by conquest is only the beginning. A kingdom held together by fear must someday shift to faith. And so, Vladimir did something remarkable. He began to look not inward, but outward. The world around him worshipped many gods. The steppe tribes looked to the sky. His own people laid offerings to rivers and stones. But the great powers, those with empires and books and coin, they bowed to something else. Vladimir sent envoys, east to the Muslims of Volga, Bulgaria, south to the Jews of Khazaria, west to the Latin Christians, and further into the dazzling heart of Constantinople, to witness the Eastern Orthodox Church. It was there, the envoys reported, that they beheld something beyond comprehension, a liturgy so luminous, so heavy with gold, incense, and celestial chant, that they no longer knew if they stood in a church or in heaven itself. Vladimir was intrigued, and more than that, he was practical. To unite his people, to impress his neighbors, and to secure his own place in the lineage of kings, he would need more than soldiers. He would need baptism. And so it was, according to later chronicles, that in 988, Vladimir marched on the Byzantine city of Chersonesus in Crimea, demanding both marriage and faith. He wed the emperor's sister, Anna, a rare concession from Constantinople, and in return, he allowed himself to be baptized, not just as a man, but as a symbol. He took the Christian name Basil, and soon after, his subjects were ordered to gather by the river. Some went willingly, some with confusion, some with fear. Imagine the banks of the Dnieper River, men and women standing waist deep in muddy water, crossing themselves clumsily, as priests intoned in a language few understood. It was not a clean transition. Old gods did not vanish overnight. Amulets still hung on necks beneath linen shirts. Ancient prayers still passed between grandmothers. But the wheel had turned. From this moment forward, Kievan Rus would move with the Christian world. Churches rose, slowly. Wooden crosses appeared where sacred groves once stood. Clergy came from Constantinople bringing books, hymns, ritual. Vladimir, once a man of war, now became a patron of religion. He built churches, gave alms, and took on the image of a Christian prince. Later, he would be canonized Saint Vladimir, though the sainthood came centuries later, polished smooth by time. In truth, he was complex, a ruler with many wives, many contradictions, and a night always on the horizon. But on that day by the river, a new chapter began, and from those ripples, muddy, hesitant, uncertain, rose the outlines of a nation still learning what kind of soul it would carry. Segment 3. The Lost Library of Yaroslav. Let us walk now through a different silence. Not the biting silence of snow, nor the ceremonial hush of royal courts, but the silence of memory of a thing that might have been, but is no longer here. We begin with a name, Yaroslav the Wise, a prince, a builder, a man remembered more for parchment than for sword. He reigned from 1019 to 1054, during the golden years of Kievan Rus, a time when the young kingdom, still cradling its Christian identity, began to look more and more like a nation with ambitions of culture, order, and permanence. Yaroslav founded churches, sent his daughters to marry foreign kings, and welcomed scholars into his court. He commissioned laws, copied texts, and most famously, established what some say was the greatest library of the East Slavic world, the Library of Yaroslav. Supposedly kept within the chambers of the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, was said to house hundreds, some say thousands, of texts, Greek writings, Slavic chronicles, theological works, histories, prayers, medicinal recipes, and perhaps even books brought from Byzantium and beyond. But here is where the story begins to drift, not into fiction, but into fog. Because the library has never been found. No catalog has survived. No shelf. No parchment fragment with a stamp or seal. It is not mentioned in the tale by those who followed. It exists only in suggestion, in passing references, and in the persistent hum of curious hope. Scholars have speculated. Was it burned in the Mongol invasions of the 13th century? Hidden in crypts? Destroyed in one of the many sieges Kiev would endure? Or was it ever real? Could the story of Yaroslavl's library be a magnified memory? A single room of manuscripts, turned into legend over time. There are traces, mentions in chronicles, echoes in lore, even tales though unverifiable of 17th century priests claiming to have seen vaults beneath the cathedral lined with decaying books. Some say parts of the collection were spirited away, dispersed to monasteries, lost in floods, or locked forever beneath stone no one dares disturb. But most agree on one thing. If the library existed, it is gone now. Its absence is not merely physical. It is felt, a kind of intellectual ache in the historical record, a silence where voices once were. And still, the thought lingers. What knowledge was stored there? What saints, emperors, or heretics spoke from those pages? What words of medicine, mathematics, astronomy, or quiet human reflection were? Segment 4. Life in the Prince's Hall. Now we come to the inner chambers. The flicker of oil lamps on beams stained black with smoke, the worn softness of her underfoot, the slow creak of benches that have borne the weight of warriors, monks, and emissaries for generations. We are in a princely hall, perhaps in Kiev, perhaps Suzdal, one of the many seats of power and the lands of early Rus. Here, the cold is kept at bay not by fire alone, but by layers of animal hide, by thick walls of timber, and by tradition passed quietly between mouths that rarely smile. It is evening. The feast is not loud. It is deliberate. Meat is poured, not in celebration, but in affirmation of loyalty, of lineage, of law. You might expect gold here, or marble, but this world is wooden, wood carved with spirals, beasts, and saints, wood that holds sound softly, that keeps the thunder of the outside world at a respectful distance. The prince is on a raised platform, not on a throne, but a judgment bench built more for function than spectacle. Beside him are the Druzina, his retinue, men bound by oath, their swords rarely drawn, but never far. Below them, in the lower chamber, sit envoys, supplicants, clan leaders. Each waits for a nod, a word, an invitation to speak. There are rules here, old ones. To raise your voice uninvited is to offend. To question a judgment is to invite quiet exile. And yet, this hall is not only for rulings. It is also for stories. After the matters of tribute, land, and marriage have been settled, a hush falls across the chamber, and someone rises to speak, not to argue, but to recite. This is the realm of the skald, a poet, sometimes a priest, sometimes a man with one eye and 1,000 verses. He tells of the old days, when Oleg nailed his shield to the gates of Constantinople, when Sviatoslav crossed the rivers with a beard of ice, when the gods of thunder and earth still listened. The words are slow, measured. They ripple through the hall like smoke. The prince listens, not with delight, but with duty. For in these verses lie the memory of his people, and a ruler forgets the old songs at his own peril. Food is served in intervals. Dark bread, salted fish, or roasted and shared with deliberate grace. No one eats until the prince does. No one leaves until dismissed. Behind the hall, down narrow stairs, are the chambers of rest. Low bed stuffed with straw, Woolen blankets, windows no wider than a man's hand. In these quiet rooms, political marriages are negotiated, alliances sealed with wine, or sometimes with silence. Here, the pulse of rust does not thunder. It hums, soft, slow, steady. A wooden world, built not for eternity, but for memory. The Viking world before Scandinavia. Welcome to the land before the names, before Norway, before Sweden, before Denmark. There was only the north, a world of snow and smoke, of frozen fjords, carved ships, and gods who hung from trees. This was a time without maps, without nations, only kin and clan, blood and oath. You'll hear of Vikings as warriors and raiders. But tonight, we settle into their world more slowly. We step through the longhouse door. We sail on dark waters. We listen to the sagas sung in half-sleep beside the hearth. It was a world hard enough to break a modern soul, but not without beauty. So now, settle in. Let the winds outside howl. Let the snow pile against the walls of history. Let the past come softly, with the smell of salt and smoke. You are in the north, before kingdoms, before flags. This is the Viking world, and it was never quiet. Segment 1. Surviving a day in a Norse longhouse, not a chance. The winter has not ended. It never truly ends here. You sleep curled near the fire pit, not for comfort but survival. The floor is packed dirt, and the air is thick with smoke. Every breath tastes of wood ash and goat hair. You are not free. You are a thrall bond servant, taken from some coastal raid, bought or inherited, here in a longhouse in what will someday be Norway. You belong to another. Your day begins in darkness. There is no sunrise, only a pale blue haze. You are already moving, feeding the fire, chopping frozen wood, breaking ice to fetch water. The livestock live inside the longhouse with you, not out of kindness, but necessity. Their warmth keeps the air livable. Their scent is overwhelming. You clean the waste. You boil the oats. You scrub hide stiff with blood and salt. The jarl's wife watches you, not cruelly, but without affection. You are part of the structure, like the beams overhead or the old dog curled at the threshold. If food is scarce, saying it usually is, you eat after everyone else. Grain porridge, salted fish, if you're lucky, a scrap of meat, boiled so long it turns gray. There are children, but their laughter is muffled. They have already seen death. An uncle lost in a storm, a cousin who slipped on the ice. In the evenings, stories are told in the warmest part of the longhouse. You are allowed to listen, but not speak. The skald chants a verse about Odin's eye, and you close yours. You imagine freedom. You imagine the sea. You imagine nothing. Outside, the wind howls like a wolf tired to hunt. Inside, the fire cracks, and tomorrow will come again. You wouldn't last a day, but somehow, you've lasted one more. Segment 2. The raid on Lindisfarne. Now, the wind shifts. We leave the smoky longhouse behind and follow the scent of salt and pine to a coastline dotted with jagged rock and seabirds. The year is 793 CE, and the sea brings more than fish. On a narrow island off the northeast coast of what is now England, there stands a quiet monastery, Lindisfarne. It is a place of prayer, of ink and vellum, of quiet psalms and small lives dedicated to God. But something is coming. To the monks, the sea had always been a pathway for pilgrims, not plunderers. They had built their sanctuary in isolation, believing distance would guard them better than walls. But distance means nothing to those with ships. The Vikings arrived just before dawn. Longboats slide from the mist, narrow and low. Their sails are furled. Their oars are silent. There is no warning. By the time the monks hear shouting, it's too late. The raiders move quickly, not as soldiers in formation, but as men who know hunger, who know how to strike and vanish. They are not looking for battle. They are looking for gold, books bound in silver, chalices, and meat. Lindisfarne was no fortress. The monks wore robes, not armor. Their only defense was faith. Some are killed, some were taken, some flee across the tidal flats, barefoot in panic. The altar is looted, the reliquaries are smashed, the gospel books are tossed aside or taken, valued not for their words, but their gilded covers. The survivors speak of it like a storm, a sudden violence from the sea. It shocked the Christian world. A monastery sacred, peaceful, unguarded, defiled. Letters flew across Europe. Chroniclers wrote in stunned tones. On the 8th of June, the ravages of heathen men miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne with plunder and slaughter. To the Norse, it was just another raid. A rich target, a successful journey. They had no interest in theology, only wealth, only survival. But to the rest of Europe, this marked the beginning of something new. Not just a raid, but a pattern, the start of the Viking Age. Lindisfarne became legend, a quiet place torn open, a symbol of innocence destroyed. And for centuries after, whenever a cloister heard the wind shift and the gulls cry strangely, they wondered if the sails would come again. Segment 3. The ship burials of Oseberg and Gokstad. Now we sail into the past, not across oceans, but into the earth. Let the sea fade. Let the shouting of raiders fall silent. Let us return to Norway, to two hills that rose strangely from the farmland, quiet and grassy, concealing what once floated on water. Beneath these mounds, archaeologists uncovered something astonishing. The full Viking ships, buried not to sail but to carry the dead. They are known as the Oseberg and Gokstad burials. Let's begin with Oseberg. Discovered in 1904 near a farm in Vestfold, Norway, the mound contained a finely carved ship nearly 20 meters long. Its prow twisted into a curling serpent. Its wood stained black with time. Inside were two women, one younger, possibly a servant, one older, likely a noble woman, or even a queen. She had been buried in regal splendor. There were sleighs, wooden chests, woven tapestries, and buckets filled with apples and berries. There were combs, there were looms, and there were animals sacrificed for the voyage ahead. Horses, dogs, cattle, no swords, no shields, but power all the same. Oseberg whispers of a society where women could rule, where status was honored not only in life, but in death. Then there is Gokstad, discovered a few decades earlier. This ship was larger, sleeker, more suited for the open sea. Inside was a man, likely a chieftain or perhaps a king. He was laid in a wooden chamber. With him, a game board, drinking horns, a sleigh, and 12 horses. His body had been disturbed by looters long ago, but what remained told a story. These burials were not just about honoring the dead. They were statements, public displays of wealth, belief, and identity. To be buried in a ship was to take the sea with you, to sail, even in death. The Norse believed in journeys beyond the grave to realms like hell or Valhalla or somewhere quieter, unnamed. These ships were not merely coffins. They were vehicles for the soul. Even the placement of grave goods was thoughtful. A saddle, a cart, a carved animal head, things one might need if life were not truly over. Today, these ships rest in museums. Their wood gently lit, their curves silent but still proud. They remind us that death in this cold northern world was not an end, but a departure. And in honoring the dead with such care, the Norse revealed something deeply human: the desire for meaning, the love of ritual, and the need to keep sailing even when the sails are folded and the sea has grown still. Segment 4. Jarl Feast and Skaldic Poetry. Now, step through a heavy wooden doorway. Inside, the longhouse glows with firelight, not the smoke-choked darkness of the thrall's corner, but the wide central hall, warm from hearths and filled with voices. You are at a Jarl's feast. The wind may still howl outside, but here, there is mead, there is roasted boar, still steaming. There are furs draped across benches and the low murmur of contented guests. This is not a place of wild, chaotic debauchery. The image of Vikings as reckless drinkers is incomplete. A Jarl's feast was a ceremony of status, of honor, of memory. Everything here means something. The placement of seats, the carved animals on the drinking horns, even the order of toasts to the gods, to ancestors, to the king. The food is simple but rich. Boiled turnips, honeyed bread, and fish caught in frozen rivers. But the star of the evening is not on the table. It is standing just beside the fire. The skald. He is the poet, the memory keeper. Draped in a ruffled cloak, voice steady and practiced. Tonight, he sings of a raid long past, of a battle beneath green hills, of a Jarl who fell with a blade in hand and no regrets. His words are an Old Norse measured, alliterative, strange to modern ears. Steel sang on shields, frost claimed the foolish, but Thur's breath carried the Jarl home. He recites Kenning's poetic riddles and layered phrases, will row for the sea, battle sweat for blood, wolf's joy for the corpses after war. This is more than poetry. It is how the Norse remembered, how they shaped history, not with ink but with sound. The guests nod, some close their eyes. The children sit quietly, letting the rhythm soak into memory. The Jarl himself lifts a horn in solemn thanks. For him, the skald's song is legacy. Outside, the stars burn cold over snow, but within, time feels suspended. You are not in a medieval past. You are in a world that lives only in verse, and stories told beside a hearth while the northern night stretches endlessly onward. And in this warmth, among these voices, you feel the shape of a world before kingdoms, before flags, before history hardened into names. Just verses, just firelight, just memory. A soft goodbye beneath northern skies. And now, the longhouse quiets, the fire burns low. The skald's voice has faded into the rafters, and the last horn of mead has been passed from hand to hand. You've been far tonight, from frozen forests and chain labor to whispered prayers and monasteries to graves shaped like ships and feasts lit by flickering flame and poetry. You've seen the north as it once was, raw, wide, and old, before borders, before kings, before the names we use today. There was no Sweden, Norway, or Denmark here. Only clans and gods, only the sea and the sky, and the long memory of snow. And yet, it was not chaos. There were rituals, hierarchies, laws carved in wood, verses remembered for generations. Even the violence had shape. Even the grief had rhyme. History often paints the Viking world as loud, brutal, and brash. But in truth, it was also quiet, ritualized, filled with longing and story. In their ships, they honored the dead. In their halls, they honored memory. And in their winters, they endured. That is the essence of this place. A world where you could wait before sunrise to break ice with your bare hands and fall asleep to the sound of verses echoing against a timbered roof. A world where strength was honored, but so was song. And now, as your thoughts drift gently across fjords and firelight, know that you have walked through a forgotten north. Not as a warrior, not as a king, but as a quiet witness. And the north, it remembers. Let your breathing slow. Let the snow fall quietly in your imagination. Let the sea still. You are warm. You are safe, and your long ship has reached its shore. Sleep well. Traveler, the gods are resting now. The lost world of Britannia, welcomed to a land beneath the land you know, where the roads run straight but vanish into fields, and where the names on old stones speak softly of emperors long gone. Tonight, we journey back to Roman Britain, a forgotten province at the edge of the empire, where villas stood above misty meadows, and legionaries warmed themselves beside turf walls that stretched to nowhere. It was never quite Rome, and it was never quite Britain. It was something in between. A world of bathhouses and altars, of cold garrisons and imported wine, of whispers in Latin, murmurs in Brythonic, and rumors in Greek. This was a land conquered, settled, and then slowly left behind. So close your eyes. Let the sound of modern life grow still, and prepare to wander the fog-covered lanes of a half-remembered world. This is Britannia. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in Roman Britain. The wind finds every gap in your armor. Your breath clouds in front of you, short, sharp, white in the freezing northern air. You are a soldier stationed at a small outpost on Hadrian's Wall, and you have never been colder in your life. The year is somewhere around 140 CE. Rome still rules, but only just. You are not from Rome. You might be from Syria, Gaul, Thrace, wherever the empire conscripted from this season. You barely understand the locals, and the locals don't want you here. The fort where you sleep is made of stone and timber. Your bunk is hard. Your boots are soaked. Your armor chafes your shoulders. Your companions grumble in languages you don't know well enough to curse back in each morning. Before dawn, the trumpet sounds. You wake in the dark. You eat hard bread and thin gruel. Then you march out to patrol the wall. The wall, stretching nearly 80 Roman miles, is Rome's final northern frontier. Beyond it, wild lands, strange gods, and tribes who paint their bodies blue. They raid sometimes fast and violent, or they vanish into the hills like ghosts. But today, it's just the wind. You march, then stand guard. You watch sheep clouds ravens. Sometimes you hear distant hooves and freeze, but it's nothing. Back at the fort, you oil your sword. You carry water. You fill the grain store. There is always work, and none of it feels Roman. At night, the latrines freeze over. You drink bad wine, sing half-remembered songs, and try to forget that your tour is 20 years long. The centurion has a better room. He eats meat. He gets letters from the South News from Londinium or Camulodunum. You get nothing. There are rumors, always rumors, of soldiers deserting, of strange omens, of gods older than Jupiter, whispering in the stones. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right, you wonder if Rome has already forgotten you. Because in truth, it has. This far from the Mediterranean, this deep into the fog, you are not a Roman, you are a shadow of an empire that's already slipping into the sea. And you wouldn't last a day. Segment 2. The mysterious disappearance of the 9th Legion. Let us now move from one lonely garrison to the whispers of legend, to the question that has haunted Britannia's northern mists for nearly 2,000 years. What happened to the 9th Legion? They were known as Legio IX Hispana, the 9th Spanish Legion, one of Rome's most seasoned, most decorated military forces. They fought in Gaul, in Germany, in civil wars and frontier campaigns. And then sometime in the early 2nd century, they simply vanished. No one knows precisely where. No one knows precisely when. And no one has ever found their bones. Let us go back, not to a date etched in stone, but to a silence in the record. It is somewhere around 117 CE. Trajan is emperor. The empire is at its widest extent, and the 9th is stationed in the Bork of modern-day York. They had been in Britannia for nearly a century. They had helped suppress Boudicca's revolt, built forts, roads, and walls. They were a backbone of imperial order in a wild and restless province. But in the northern hills, beyond the grasp of Rome's paved roads and Latin scribes, something stirs. Perhaps it began with a raid, or with a rebellion, or maybe with a campaign that was meant to be small, but grew. Some speculate the Ninth marched north into Caledonia, modern-day Scotland, to punish or pacify a local tribe, to expand Rome's reach one step further. And there, something went terribly wrong. Some say they were ambushed in the hills, encircled, cut off, slain to the last man in a place no one would ever bother to reclaim. Others suggest they simply vanished into myth, intermarrying with locals, deserting their posts, leaving their standards buried in peat. There is even the theory that the Ninth was reassigned elsewhere to Armenia or the East and perished in some forgotten border war, lost not in the mists of Scotland, but the sands of a different empire. But the truth remains buried. No grave markers, no mass tombs, no definitive final inscription. By the time of Hadrian's visit to Britain around 120 to CE, a new legion had replaced the Ninth. The Sixth, fresh, well-equipped, cautious. And Hadrian, he ordered the construction of his wall not out of triumph, but perhaps out of fear. The Ninth was never mentioned again in surviving Roman records. It was as if they had never existed, but they did, and somewhere in the heathered hills or the deep loam, their story still lingers. Perhaps a rusted sword, a shattered helm, a fragment of tile with a phoenix scratched into the clay, or perhaps nothing at all, just mist and wind, and the silence that follows when history exhales and leaves. Segment 3 of the Cursed Tablets of Bath. Now, step softly with me into a place that still echoes with warm water and whispered spite. The town of Aqua Sulis, known today as Bath, where steam rises from sacred springs, and forgotten voices hide in the stone. For centuries, this was a place of healing and ritual. The Romans built elaborate baths here not just for hygiene, but for ceremony, community, and reverence. They believed the spring was holy, a gift from the goddess Sulis Minerva, a fusion of local Celtic beliefs and Roman divinity. Here, pilgrims came to soak their bones, offer thanks, and occasionally to seek revenge deep in the sacred spring. Archaeologists have discovered over 130 thin sheets of lead and pewter, small, delicate, and cursed. They are known as the Bath Cursed Tablets. Some are neatly inscribed in Latin, others hastily scratched in clumsy lettering. All are prayers of punishment, offered to the goddess by those who felt wronged. Most are mundane, almost charmingly so. To the goddess Sulis, I give to you the thief who took my cloak and bathing tunic. Whether man or woman, whether free or slave, I ask that they lose their mind and limbs. Tablet no. 26. Another tablet reads, He who has done me wrong, may he not sleep, nor eat, nor speak, until he returns my goods. Some include names, lists of suspects, as though Sulis herself would conduct the investigation. Others simply plead, to whoever did this, make them suffer. These weren't public decrees. They were folded, pierced with nails, and cast into the sacred waters, offered in secrecy. And while their tone is angry, there is something gentle in their powerlessness. These were not legal petitions or public shaming. They were small, private hopes from ordinary people with no other recourse. No lawyers, no guards, just faith. Some tablets reference magical formulas, names written backward, symbols, ancient words believed to bind or confuse. Others are straightforward. If she speaks against me, May her tongue wither, but none speak of murder, none demand blood, only justice, in whatever form Sulis might find acceptable today. These tablets are preserved in quiet glass cases, but at the time, they floated down into warm, sacred water, settling gently among coins, combs, and prayers. Imagine one, curling slightly at the edges, resting beneath the ripples, its words unread, its anger cooling in the depths. They tell us not just about Roman law or religion, but about Roman emotion, envy, jealousy, resentment, soft, human things written in lead and left for the gods to judge. Segment for a dinner with Romano-British aristocrats. Let us close our journey now not in blood, or stone, or steam, but in the soft flicker of lamplight, the scent of roasting meats, and the gentle clink of imported glass. We are in a villa, somewhere in the green folds of what is now southern England, perhaps near Cirencester, or in the gentle hills of Wiltshire. The year is around 370 CE. Rome still claims the province, but the truth is Rome is no longer watching very closely. The aristocrats who live here speak Latin, but also the old Celtic tongue. They wear Roman togas, but beneath them, woolen cloaks to keep out the chill. They live a life caught between two worlds. The villa itself is elegant in a provincial way. Low stone walls painted white, a tiled roof repaired more than once. The floors inside are covered in mosaics faded, but still proud. Scenes of hunting, of gods, of vines heavy with grapes. The atrium is warmed from a hypocaust, a Roman underfloor heating system kept going by slaves who stoke fires in the basement. Tonight, a dinner party is held. Guests arrive on horseback or in small carriages. They're greeted with bowls of warm water for their hands and cups of wholesome wine sweetened with honey. The table is laid with ceramics from Gaul, bowls of fruit from the south, and even olive oil, carefully sealed in amphorae that crossed the channel weeks ago. The courses begin. A soft soup made from leeks, boiled eggs with a drizzle of garum Roman fish sauce, pungent and beloved. Roasted fowl, seasoned with herbs grown in a half-collapsed garden. A servant plays a lyre. Another pours more wine. The guests discuss news from the continent. The empire feels distant. One man says trade with Lutetia Paris is becoming slower. Another jokes that Saxons have been spotted on the eastern coast. No one laughs, still. The evening continues. They recite lines from Virgil. They argue softly about which emperor was greatest. They gossip about a nearby landowner who has begun using local gods' names in his oaths. It's harmless, someone says, but they all know what it means. Rome is fading here. The tiles crack, the plaster peels. The roads are no longer swept. But for now, just for tonight, there is warmth and laughter and flickering lamplight. These Romano-British elites will pass their customs to their children. They will cling to Latin a little longer. They will tell stories about the glory of Caesar and the honor of citizenship. But the legions won't return, and the dinner parties will become fewer, and the songs will change, until one day, this villa will be buried by soil, forgotten by names, and rediscovered only by archaeologists who brush dust from its mosaic of a long-lost god, and wonder what it felt like to be Roman at the end of Rome. And now, the torchlight dims, the bath water's cool, the villa doors creak closed against the rising mist. You have walked the length of ancient Britannia, from the wind-lashed outposts of Hadrian's Wall to the warm echoes of laughter beneath painted mosaics. You've stood with soldiers who feared the cold more than the sword. You've traced the vanished footprints of a legion that never came home. You've heard the whispered curses of the powerless, and dined with landowners who clung to Latin words as the world they knew. slipped quietly beneath their feet. Britannia was never truly Roman, and yet it was never again quite Celtic either. It was a land in between, half imperial, half forgotten, for centuries Rome claimed it, built roads across its hills, wrote its laws, brought its wine, its sandals, its gods. But in the end, Rome left, not all at once, not with fanfare, just silence and retreat. And in that silence, a new island was born, one of Saxons and monasteries and long memories. Yet still today, beneath quiet fields and cobbled towns, Rome sleeps, in bathhouses, and cursed tablets, and walls that still run straight through sheep-dotted valleys. And if you ever walk those roads, in the hush of early morning, or in the soft glow of twilight, you might feel it, a presence, not haunting, but watching. The empire may have crumbled, but the stones remember, and now, so do you. Sleep well, traveler of lost provinces. The hearths are cold, but the stories are warm. Let the past keep watch. You've walked far enough for one night. What it was really like in the Holy Roman Empire. Welcome to a time when Europe did not yet know itself, to a realm that was not holy, nor Roman, nor truly an empire, but still very much real. Tonight, we drift gently into the winding alleys, gold-leafed halls, smoky guild houses, and impossibly tangled thrones of the Holy Roman Empire, a mosaic of over 1,000 little states, free cities, bishoprics, and borderlands, ruled not by one king, but by electors, emperors, and sometimes by silence. This was a world where monks wrote treaties, nobles wrote poetry, and tax collectors wrote everything down, where German, Latin, Italian, and even Arabic could be heard depending on the court, and where emperors wore crowns, but could barely control their own dukes. It was a land of contradictions, glorious and grim, proud and petty, wise and absurd. It was, despite its name, not a single nation, but the awkward prelude to many. So take a deep breath, let the noise of today fall away, and prepare to lose yourself in the candlelight and cobblestones of a forgotten world. The Holy Roman Empire awaits. Segment 1: Why you wouldn't last a day in a free imperial city. Daily life immersion. A tanner. In Nuremberg, the bells toll before dawn. You stir in your cot, still sore from yesterday's labor. Outside, the air is thick with mist and something worse. The stench, even before the sun rises, is overpowering. You are a tanner, and this is Nuremberg, one of the many free imperial cities dotting the empire, semi-autonomous, governed by guilds and trade laws, not kings. Your home is modest wooden beams, a tiled stove, damp corners. You sleep above your workshop, and your workshop stinks of urine, rotting hides, and lime water. You dress quickly, coarse wool, an apron crusted with yesterday's efforts and the sin to begin your day. The process is slow, foul, and relentless. Hides soaked in water to loosen hair, drenched in human urine, gathered nightly from chamber pots, scraped clean with curved knives, soaked again in lime to soften the flesh, and all of it done by hand. You work near the edge of town, far from the market square, because tanners are tolerated, not welcome. The smell, the runoff, the disease, it must be kept at a distance. Your neighbors are other undesirable but necessary trades, dyers, butchers, executioners. But even out here, the guilds are watching. You cannot sell a single strip of leather unless your seal is stamped. You cannot work with more than 2 apprentices. You cannot expand your shop without permission. And once a month, a guild inspector arrives to check your vats, your scales, your tools, and to collect his share. But it's not just the guild. There are also the city councils, the market judges, the imperial taxman, and the church each demands their piece. Each arrives with a scroll and a seal, speaking in Latin or harsh dialects, nodding slowly as they tally their coins. You attend Mass not out of devotion, but because not attending raises eyebrows. You do not speak against the emperor, though you've never seen him, and he will never know your name. Instead, you focus on your work, on your family, on not falling behind in your dues. At midday, you eat bread soaked in broth. If it's a good day, there's cabbage. If it's a feast day, maybe pork. You drink wheat beer safer than water and return to your Heights hotel. But at dusk, something happens. You pass through the market square, and for a moment, the city reveals its other face. Merchants light their stalls with oil lamps. Children play in the gutters. A town crier reads news from Rome or Vienna. A procession of monks passes by, humming low prayers. The tower clock ticks with wooden gears, counting time in a city that is somehow free, yet bound by 1,000 invisible ropes. You wonder, briefly, what it would be like to be a merchant or a goldsmith or a guild master. But the thought passes. You return home. The scent of urine and hides clings to your hair. You fall into bed before darkness fully settles. And as you drift off, your last thoughts are of taxes unpaid and the punishment for tanners who failed their quotas. In this world of church bells and ink seals, freedom comes with a smell. And you, dear listener, you wouldn't last a day. Segment 2, The Reign and Madness of Frederick II, the biography, event narrative now. Let us leave the narrow alleys and the stench of tanners behind. Let us rise into the marble halls and desert gardens of a most unusual emperor. A man so brilliant, so feared, so contradictory, that even the church branded him Antichrist. This was Frederick II, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, King of Sicily, King of Jerusalem, and perhaps a man out of time. Born in 1194 in the southern Italian town of Jesse, Frederick's life began on the road. His mother gave birth in a tent on the way back from Germany because power never waited for comfort. He was a child of empires. His grandfather was Frederick Barbarossa, the great red-bearded emperor. His father, Henry VI, and his mother, a Norman queen. But when both parents died young, Frederick was left behind, an orphan, not in a castle, but in the strange, sun-drenched kingdom of Sicily, a land where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived beneath one crown, and it shaped him. He was educated by scholars fluent in Arabic, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He studied the stars, the body, and the Quran. He kept a menagerie of exotic animals, lions, camels, elephants, and falcons, and wrote one of the earliest treatises on falconry still read today. But he was no idle philosopher. He was emperor by 18, and from that throne, he began a reign that still bewilders historians. He rarely visited Germany. Despite ruling it, he fought 5 popes, each one more furious than the last. He refused to march with the Crusaders, but then negotiated the peaceful handover of Jerusalem. Without lifting a sword, he was excommunicated, re-excommunicated, and denounced as a heretic, even as he rebuilt the city of Palermo into a shining court of reason and learning. The popes called him the dragon, the beast, the Antichrist in human form. But to his courtiers, he was Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. He issued laws that limited feudal abuse. He standardized coinage, established secular courts, and protected minorities. He believed in science, not superstition, and that more than his battles made him dangerous. He even conducted strange experiments. He once raised infants without speech to see if they would naturally speak the language of Eden. They did not. They died in silence. He sent questions to Muslim scholars in Baghdad, debated philosophy with rabbis, and refused to let religious leaders dictate his politics. To some, he was a visionary. To others, blasphemous. But even he could not outlast the tide of suspicion and fracture. When he died in 1250, his empire began to splinter. The German princes grew restless. The papacy reasserted its power, and the unity he forged between Sicily, Germany, and Jerusalem slowly fell apart. Yet his legacy endures like a flame behind glass. Frederick II, the philosopher king, the falconer emperor, the scourge of popes, was perhaps not mad, but merely too modern for his age, a heretic to the priests, a genius to the scribes, and to us, a gentle ghost in a world half remembered. Segment 3, The Mystery of Charlemagne's Tomb. Let us drift further back now, to a time even the emperors remembered with reverence, to a figure so towering, so storied, that his name itself became the very crown of the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne Karl der Grote Charles the Great. He died over 1,000 years ago, in the winter of 814, in the city of Aachen. Aachen, with its steaming mineral springs, its distant Roman echoes, its chapel crowned in gold. It was here that Charlemagne ruled, and it is here somewhere he still rests. But the truth is, no one is entirely sure where. Charlemagne's tomb is both known and unknown, seen and unseen. A riddle wrapped in relics, hidden beneath centuries of reverence, decay, and renovation. Let us go gently now, down into the cool shadows of Aachen Cathedral. Here, in the Palatine Chapel, a marvel of Carolingian architecture, Charlemagne was buried, but not in a simple crypt, and not in a manner befitting a man. For centuries, rumors swirled. Some claimed that Charlemagne wasn't buried lying down but seated on a throne of marble, dressed in robes, a crown on his head, his scepter in hand, his gaze forever fixed forward, as if waiting for resurrection, for judgment, or simply for the next chapter in empire. In the year 1000, Otto III, his imperial descendant, allegedly opened the tomb, and there, it is said, he found him exactly so, not dust, not bone, but whole dot upright dot silent. Otto, awestruck, took relics, his sword, his cross, a lock of hair, and resealed the chamber. Others doubted the tale, but over the centuries, pieces of Charlemagne were scattered across Europe, his arm here, his skull there, each one encased in gold and crystal, and yet the exact location of the original tomb faded. Wars, renovations, fires, the slow forgetting of precise things. In the 12th century, his remains were reportedly gathered and placed in a magnificent golden sarcophagus. The Karl Shrine still on display today in the cathedral. But is it all of him? Is it him at all? Even more curiously, his throne is simple. Weathered seat made of stone remains in the upper gallery of the cathedral. And for hundreds of years, emperors of the Holy Roman Empire were crowned while seated upon it. It was not ornamented. It was not soft. It was, perhaps, the closest thing the empire had to a relic of authority. And yet no one sat there comfortably. Charlemagne's presence in death remained unsettling, not because he was feared, but because he was unfinished. His empire had ended, but also not quite. To this day, beneath the tile mosaics and golden vaults of Aachen, tourists pass over stones they do not realize may lie directly above the true resting place of Charlemagne, a place never precisely marked, perhaps intentionally, perhaps lost, or perhaps only the emperor knows, and he is not telling. Segment 4, Life in the Bavarian Courts. Now, let us float gently from the ancient tombs of Aachen into something livelier. Let the cold stone give way to velvet drapes. and the quiet of relics to the soft clink of porcelain. We are now in Bavaria, where the Holy Roman Empire took on its most glittering disguise. It is the 18th century, and while the empire itself is declining, fractured, toothless, almost ceremonial, the Bavarian courts are thriving in a world of powdered wigs, rococo mirrors, and constant ceremony. Here, empire does not mean conquest. It means opera, etiquette, and endless dining. You are not a duke. You are not even nobility. You might be a minor court clerk, or perhaps a chamber violinist, paid to play 3 times a week and stay out of political discussion. Your morning begins not with labor, but with a ritual, a light breakfast, sweetened milk, rolls, and sugared fruits before you attend to your duties in the Hofburg or residence. You pass beneath frescoed ceilings, past portraits of stiff noblemen whose eyes seem to follow you. Every hour here is carefully structured. Dukes and electors rise late, dress with the help of valets, and receive visitors in rooms arranged by rank. Each room deeper into the palace signifies higher intimacy. Only the most trusted are ever invited to the bedchamber for coffee and morning news. Then it comes the music, opera houses, funded by ducal treasure. Filled with candlelight and French phrases, Italian tenors compete for favor. Court composers, perhaps even a young Mozart, grumble quietly about late payments and poor acoustics. In the afternoons, the noble classes attend masked balls, where conversation is delicate, flirtation is allowed, and scandal is both feared and desired. Bavaria is Catholic, proudly so, but worldly. Its rulers collect ancient coins, rare clocks, and porcelain swans. Some even dabble in alchemy or natural philosophy, hosting salons where powdered guests argue politely about stars and atoms. The evenings are slow, scented with rose water and tobacco smoke. A feast may feature 14 courses, each served with care, though most guests nibble politely, aware that gluttony is frowned upon, unless the emperor himself indulges. Outside these golden rooms, however, the townsfolk live another life. Peasants till the soil under heavy taxes. Artisans wear wool, not silk. The empire, to them, is a distant thing felt more in coin and crop than in pageantry. But within the courts, the illusion holds. Bavaria may never rival France. It may never control the empire, but it perfects the art of appearing important. And for those who lived within its candlelit halls, surrounded by powdered faces and whispered alliances, it was a world unto itself, a world that glittered and faded softly. And now, the candles have burned low, the music has faded, the last courtier has bowed, and the empire, such as it was, drifts quietly back into shadow. You have walked through its crooked streets and sat beside its golden thrones. You have smelled the hyatt vats of Nuremberg, heard the falcons cry in Sicily, traced the silence over Charlemagne's sealed tomb, and listened to the rustle of silk behind palace doors in far-off Bavaria. This was the Holy Roman Empire, not a nation, but a puzzle, not a kingdom, but a negotiation, not an empire, but a mirror of what Europe might become. It never truly ruled, it never truly unified, and yet for nearly 1,000 years, it persisted through plague and parchment, heresy and harmony. It was messy and majestic, and sometimes oddly peaceful in its chaos. Tonight, as you rest, remember, the empires we inherit are rarely neat. They are layered, splintered, stitched together by memory and myth. They whisper through architecture and language and borders we no longer see, and customs we never question. So let the empire dissolve now. Let the church bells fall silent. Let the pages close. You are no longer walking cobblestones. You are safe, still, and at ease. The tanners have gone home. The emperors are asleep. The crown is no longer heavy. And you are exactly where you need to be. Breathe in and let go. The past is resting now. And so are you.
The Forgotten Kingdoms before Spain, welcome to another quiet descent into the past. Tonight, we drift south to a peninsula, a land where jagged mountains hide old secrets and cities rise from rivers like slow-burning candles. A place we know today as Spain. But it wasn't always Spain? No! Before it was one country, it was many. Warring kingdoms, whispering religions, ancient roads walked by conquerors and exiles alike. There were Visigothic kings, seated in marble halls while plagues swept through the countryside. There were Muslim emirs who built palaces that caught moonlight like water. There were Jewish poets, Christian scribes, Berber warriors, and monks with swords. And across the land, borders changed like shadows. Dynasties rose, dynasties fell, and sometimes, in the end, people simply lived. This is the story of Iberia before Spain, a story not of unity, but of fragmentation, not of a single crown, but of many each adorned with its own burdens, its own vanishing legacy. So, let the night wrap around you like the Andalusian breeze. Let the noise of the present soften, and imagine yourself, long ago, in a city of stone and stars. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in Al-Andalus? Imagine yourself in some time in the 10th century. The city is alive well before the sun rises. You stir from your straw mattress in a small domed room that opens into a narrow courtyard. The air is already warm, touched by the scent of citrus trees and clay dust. Around you, the city is waking, but not slowly. In Al-Andalus, the morning begins with structure and purpose. You are not a merchant. You are not a scholar. You are not a nobleman or you are a servant, bound to the household of a wealthy family, one that walks carefully in the shadow of both faith and power. Your day begins in silence, not because you are tired, but because you are afraid to speak without permission. The master of the house is a man of study. He reads Arabic, Latin, and Greek. He keeps company with imams and visiting scholars. His reputation is delicate, and you are invisible, unless you were. The tasks are endless, though each must be performed with quiet grace. Clean the tile floors of the courtyard before sunlight touches them. Light the brass lamps for the pre-dawn meal. Check the storeroom for mold on the dates or insects in the lentils. And always listen, because listening can save you. Spies walk the streets. They sit in tea houses, pretending to nap. They hear what is said behind latticed windows and beneath the awnings of bakeries. The wrong joke, the wrong phrase, even the wrong tone, and your master's entire household may be summoned to explain itself. Yet within this tension, there is beauty. As the sun rises, light filters through the geometric wooden screens of the house. They're called casting patterned shadows on the walls. The women begin their own rituals, grinding spices, folding silks, whispering poetry to one another while threading their hair. Outside, the city hums. You pass scholars in woolen robes walking to the libraries. In books are copied by the hundreds by Muslim, Jewish scribes, and Christian monks under royal protection. You pass the spice market, cumin. You smell freshly baked bread from shared communal ovens. And beyond the alleys, the mezquita stands with its endless arches, red and white like the ribs of some great stone animal. It is both a house of prayer and a symbol of triumph, echoing with the rhythm of a civilization in its prime. But still, your day is not your own. You fetch water from the courtyard well. You avoid eye contact with passing guards. You speak carefully, remembering which guests are Sunni, which are Shia, and which follow no prophet at all. Even laughter must be cautious. The master's cousin has recently disappeared, taken in the night for a conversation that someone overheard. A bad poem, a misunderstood quote, maybe nothing at all. But in Al-Andalus, even silence has meaning. And so, you finish your day as you began it, quietly. You light the oil lamps, you set the pillows. You retreat to your chamber no larger than a pantry, and lie awake, listening to the distant sound of music drifting from another quarter. Strings, wind, slow melody of a world far grander than your own. And you understand this city, so rich in thought and splendor, is also delicate. A world of glass and mirrors, of eyes in every corner. A world where knowledge is celebrated, but freedom is rationed. Where you must speak beautifully, or not at all. And in that world, friend, you would not last a day. Segment 2. The Fall of Granada. Let the city of fall away now. Let its scholars grow quiet, its gardens return to shadow, its arches swallowed by time, and travel forward, slowly, to the final flicker of a great flame, to the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia, to Granada. It is the year 1491, and Granada still stands, a gleaming white city nestled in the folds of the Sierra Nevada, caught between two worlds. The city is tired, yet beautiful. Inside its walls lies the Alhambra, a palace that breathes poetry. Carved arabesques, courtyards filled with silence, and towers that glow like embers at dusk. Outside the walls, the armies of Castile and Aragon have surrounded it like a tightening noose. This is the end of a kingdom, of an age, and of a 1,000-year chapter in Iberian history. And at the heart of it is a quiet man, Boabdil, the last Nasrid king, born Muhammad 12, but remembered in Spain as Boabdil el Chico, the little one. He was never meant to be a warrior. He was a king born into a chessboard already mid-game. His family was fractured by intrigue, his court was splintered by factions, and his throne rested on borrowed time. Even within Granada, his own father and uncle once ruled before him. His people whispered of weakness. But outside stood Isabella and Ferdinand, the Catholic monarchs. They were united by marriage, by faith, and by ambition. They had already conquered most of Iberia, and Granada was the final piece. For 8 months, their armies surrounded the city. Tents stretched like seafoam across the plains. Supply lines snaked through mountains. Christian cannons echoed against ancient walls. And inside, the people waited. They rationed food. They prayed. Some fled. Some starved. Boabdil negotiated. He knew, perhaps better than any other, that resistance would mean ruin. The Alhambra, the libraries, the mosques would survive a siege by fire. And so he offered terms. He asked that his people be allowed to stay, to worship, to live as they had. He surrendered not with swords, but with signatures, and on January 2nd, 1492, he rode out of Granada's gates. He wore black. He handed the keys of the city to Ferdinand and Isabella. And then, on a nearby hill, he turned to look back one final time. His mother, it is said, watched him in silence, and when she saw his tears, she spoke. "You weep like a woman," she told him, "for what you could not defend like a man." Today, that hill is still called El Suspiro del Marotha, Mor Sasai, and Boabdil rode into exile, to a quiet death, his kingdom gone, his story nearly forgotten. But Granada, for a moment, it had been a jewel of tolerance, of art, of twilight grandeur, and its fall marked the end of Muslim rule, an Iberia reign that had lasted nearly 8 centuries. The mosques would be converted, the libraries burned, the people would be forced slowly. The Alhambra still stands, but its purpose is now memory. And Boabdil's sigh still lingers, a whisper of a world now vanished. Segment 3. The Lost Church of Toledo. Let the drums of conquest fade. Let the kings and queens pass from view. Let us walk now, not through a palace, but into a sanctuary of many voices. We are in Toledo, perched high above the slow, winding Tagus River. Today, it sleeps beneath cathedral spires and silent cloisters. But once, it was something rare, a city of 3 faiths, Muslims, Christians, and Jews living not in perfect peace, but in an uneasy, shifting dance of coexistence. And within this city, there once stood a place that seems almost impossible now, a building that was, over time, a church, then a mosque, then a synagogue, then a church, once more. Its walls absorbed prayers in Latin, in Hebrew, in Arabic, and though its name is long lost, the memory remains. It is sometimes called the Lost Church of Toledo. Imagine entering it in the early 12th century. The doors are carved, wood, bound in bronze. Inside, the light filters softly through narrow windows stained with age, not glass. The arches are horseshoe-shaped, remnants of Islamic architecture, painted over but not erased. The walls are inscribed not with icons, but with calligraphy, psalms in Latin, passages from the Quran, and faint Hebrew poetry in cornice, long ignored. You hear a voice reciting a verse, then a different one, later, in a different tongue. Each new group adapted the space, but none tore it down. They layered meaning instead. This was the essence of Toledo in its golden age. Here, under the Christian kings, who reconquered the city but valued its scholars, a translation movement was born. Jewish and Muslim thinkers worked side by side with monks and priests to translate ancient Greek texts, preserved in Arabic into Latin. Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, Galen, Euclid, all passed through Toledo, not in their original form, but reimagined through centuries of Muslim scholarship. Without this quiet, dusty work, much of classical knowledge might have been lost, and the translators, they were often conversos, or modiars, people who walked multiple identities, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. Their lives were delicate. A wrong word, a wrong association, could cost them their position, or worse. But within the scriptoriums of Toledo, they carved out a space for something fragile and rare, shared intellect, an agreement, unspoken, that truth was worth more than purity. But this balance was temporary. With time, suspicion grew. The Inquisition would come. The translators' descendants would flee or vanish. The synagogues would close, the Arabic books would burn, and the lost church, it would fall into ruin, renamed, restructured, absorbed into a newer building, its layered history, painted over with saints and martyrs. But some believe a trace still lingers, a carved phrase on a column where Latin meets Arabic, a floor mosaic whose pattern resembles both a cross and a star, a faint echo in the acoustics of the dome. You wouldn't notice, Not at first, but if you listened long enough, you might hear it. The whisper of a city that once believed three faiths could study under the same roof. A city that tried, however briefly, to honor knowledge above conquest. Toledo, the city that held the past together, if only for a little while.
Segment 4. The Feasting Kings of Castile. Now, let the prayers fade into the walls of Toledo. Let the pages of ancient text close softly, and follow the path north and west into the realm of Castile, where kings rule not in silence, but in spectacle, where the heavy air smells of roasting meat, oiled leather, and sweet wine, where gold glitters on fingertips and silk rustles behind every drawn curtain. This is the world of the feasting kings. Imagine yourself walking through a royal court in the 13th century, perhaps under Alfonso X, the Wise, who governed not only with sword and scribe, but with song. The court itself is not a single stone hall, but a traveling city. The monarch moves with an entourage of dozens, even hundreds, noblemen, knights, scribes, cooks, cupbearers, jesters, and translators. Where the king goes, the court goes, and when it stops, it feasts. You are not royalty. You might be a court musician, a page, or a servant to a minor noble. You awake to the clatter of hooves and the barking of dogs. The hunting party returns, falcons on their wrists, deer slung over saddles. The dogs are fed scraps. The nobles gather in the tented pavilion to remove their boots and discuss genealogy and border disputes, and soon the meal begins. You enter the great hall, long wooden tables, beneath chandeliers of iron and dripping tallow. The smell is overwhelming. Lamb with saffron, garbanzo stews, garlic sauces, trout from royal ponds, and hard cheeses wrapped in waxed linen. Silver goblets are filled, spilled, and filled again. Laughter floats under vaulted ceilings. Someone begins to sing a troubadour recounting the deeds of kings long buried. But beneath the songs, there are secrets. Court life in Castile is not all feasting and falcons. It is layered in ceremony, hierarchy, and constant, delicate tension. A wrong toast, a glance held too long, a jest made in poor taste. These things matter in a court so saturated with ritual. Social death can arrive long before the physical one. The nobles wear robes imported from North Africa, slippers sewn with silver thread, beards combed with scented oils. Women wear veils of transparent silk, fastened with gold pins shaped like lilies or suns. Everything is recorded either in books or in memory. The scribes write down each royal decree. The servants remember who insulted whom. But Castile is not merely excess. This is also a place of literature and law. Alfonso X commissioned translations, like those in Toledo, astronomical tables, philosophical texts, legal codes in the vernacular tongue. The court, for all its indulgence, is also a cradle of culture, and the king himself, sometimes wise, sometimes weary, he walks between opulence and obligation, between the needs of the nobles, the church, the peasantry, and the rising sense that somewhere in the future, a unified Spain waits just beyond the fog of time. But here, in this moment, the king simply drinks. A silver plate is cleared. A harp begins to play, and the feast goes on beneath tapestries that whisper old stories in a kingdom not yet Spain. And now, the feast grows quiet, the torches flicker low, and the voices of kings, queens, scholars, and servants alike begin to fade. You've wandered through the forgotten kingdoms that once formed the soul of Spain. Before the maps agreed on borders, before the crowns were welded into one, before the language of empire overtook the voices of the many, you lived a day in Al-Andalus, where knowledge thrived beside suspicion. and beauty stood upon fragile ground. You watched the twilight of Granada, its last king riding into exile. 1,000 years of memory trailing in his silence. You stepped through the lost church of Toledo, where three faiths once shared more than space. They shared dreams, language, and a moment of fragile harmony. And you sat quietly at the edge of a royal banquet in Castile, where power was worn like silk, and history was written between verses and toasts. These worlds are gone now, not vanished, but layered beneath the stones of modern Spain. In every plaza, every alley, every crumbling tower you will find traces of Visigoths, of Berbers, of Jews, of Romans, of warrior monks and wise kings. The Spain we know was built upon their stories, shaped by what was remembered and what was forgotten. And so, as the night deepens and your eyes grow heavier, let these kingdoms dissolve like mist. Let the names drift from memory. Let the old bells of Toledo grow quiet. Let the moon over the Alhambra disappear behind sleep. You are not standing in the palace of Granada. You are not a servant in Cordoba. You are here safe, still, and warm. Breathe in and out. The past is resting, and now, so are you.
Welcome to another quiet journey into the long-forgotten corners of the past. Tonight, we return to a time before countries had names, before cities became capitals, and before the world was divided by borders drawn in ink. We travel to the mist-covered forests and hills of ancient Gaul, a land wild with memory, still untouched by Rome's shadow. It was not yet France, nor was it even one united place, but a patchwork of tribes, languages, and rhythms stitched together by tradition, fear, and war. This was Gaul. Tonight's story is not one of kings and empires alone. It is a story of quiet suffering, of superstition clinging like moss to trees, and of a people whose lives moved with the seasons, the stars, and the whispering groves. It is a story of forgotten warriors, sacred oaks, and stone hearths, where fear and fire live side by side. We begin, as we often do, not in a palace or on a battlefield, but in the worn, muddy footprints of the common soul. So, settle in. Let the noise of the present slip away. Let the hush of history take its place, and imagine yourself in the forests of ancient Gaul. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in Gaul. Imagine yourself waking in a roundhousette's, low roof, thick with smoke, its walls woven of wattle and daub, the scent of damp earth curling in through the floor. It is winter in northern Gaul, and the sun is little more than a suggestion. Your bed is straw, your blanket is wool, coarse and thin. Beside you, a fire struggles against the morning cold, and your breath hangs in the air like ghost. You rise not with choice, but with duty. You are a woodsman in service to a chieftain. Your days are not your own. You belong to the tribe. Outside, the world is grey and wet. The path through the forest is soft with rot. Mud cakes your calves as you drag a wooden sled behind you, heavy with pine and oak. This wood will feed the tribe's fires, fuel the forge, and offer sacrifices to the gods. But you do not think of that. You think only of the blisters on your hands and the weight of the sled. The forest around you is not quiet, it breathes. Branches creak like ancient bones. Crows chatter from above. Somewhere beyond the trees, a druid chants in a tongue you only half understand. And always, always, you'll listen for boars, for wolves, for the hoofbeats of rival tribes. The world of Gaul is divided, not united. Each valley, each grove belongs to someone. Some tribes trade, some raid, and the line between them is often invisible until it is too late. You return by nightfall. The sky is a dull bruise. Inside the roundhouse, a stew of millet and wild roots simmers. It is not enough. It is rarely enough. Your wife tends the fire. Your children sleep early, lulled by hunger and fatigue. There is no privacy. The smoke stings your eyes. Outside, the village watchman sharpens his blade by torchlight. Tomorrow, the priest may demand an offering. The gods must be pleased, especially in winter. A goat, perhaps, or something more. You've seen it before. You've heard the screams in the forest, and you've dared not ask who it was. You do not speak of these things. Instead, you chew your stew and watch the fire. And when you sleep, it is not for rest. It is for escape. This is your life, a constant struggle, a fragile order, a world of cold, superstition, and silence. And truly, you would not last a day. Segment 2, Vercingetorix and the Siege of Ely. Let us drift now from the forest trails and low fires of daily life to a hilltop rising above a storm of armies, a place where myth meets memory, and a name long strange and resonant still echoes through the stones. Vercingetorix, a name as heavy as iron, a name passed down not by his people, but by the conquerors who broke him. He was born into the Arverni, a proud tribe of central Gaul. He may have been raised on tales of strength, of honor, and of betrayal. His father, it is said, was executed for trying to take power. The boy would have grown up with that lesson burned deep into his bones. Power is dangerous, but weakness is worse. The world around him was already changing. Roman merchants appeared more often. Roads stretched like fingers from the south. Latin words crept into markets and law. Some tribes welcomed it, others fought, but none could resist it for long. And then came Caesar, the Roman general, ambitious, brilliant, tireless, moved through Gaul with calculated cruelty. He claimed to bring peace. What he brought was domination. Tribe by tribe, he shattered resistance. Villages were burned. Chiefs were made to kneel. But Vercingetorix saw the cracks in Rome's reach. He understood that Gaul could not survive as divided tribes. And so, for the first time in memory, someone tried to unite them. He did not do it gently. Vercingetorix enforced discipline with fire and sword. Those who betrayed the alliance were punished harshly. Their cities burned by their own countrymen to deny them to Rome. Grain was hoarded. Horses were gathered. The land was scorched behind him. His army grew tens of thousands strong. Warriors from across Gaul, wearing twisted moustaches and painted shields, rallied behind him. He had no Rome, no Senate, but he had the land, the forests, the people, and he had Alesia. Alesia was not just a hill, it was a final stand, high on a plateau, surrounded by deep ditches and sloped walls. Vercingetorix watched as Caesar's legions approached and did something almost unthinkable. They did not attack. They built. The Romans dug trenches, raised wooden palisades, drove stakes into the earth. Then they built mortar rings of fortification, one to keep the Gauls in and one to keep the relieving Gauls out. Alesia became a trap, a cage. For weeks, the siege dragged on. Supplies dwindled. Hunger spread. Within the walls, people chewed bark, boiled leather, waited. Outside, a relief army came, perhaps 200,000 strong. For 2 days, the world shattered in the fields around Alesia. Arrows darkened the sky. War cries roared. And still, the Roman lines held. In the end, the united Gauls were broken. And Vercingetorix, seeing no hope, rode out on his horse, draped in his finest armor, and surrendered to Caesar himself. It is said he made no sound, only bowed his head. He would spend 6 years in chains, and then, in the streets of Rome, paraded as a trophy in Caesar's triumph. He was in a prison far from the forests of Gaul. Yet his story would not end there. Not truly. The Romans remembered him not as a savage, but as a worthy enemy. And centuries later, when France sought to define its soul, they reached back not to emperors but to a long-haired warrior who tried, once, to make a nation out of tribes, versus the Gaul who dared to say no. Segment 3. Druids and the Forbidden Groves. Let us step away now from the clash of armies and the heavy crown of defiance, and wander instead into the trees. Not just any trees, but sacred groves, places where the forest was not just wild, but holy, where silence spoke, and the rustle of leaves might carry the voices of gods. In ancient Gaul, before the written word tethered thoughts to parchment, before temples of stone declared power in columns and vaults, there were the Druids, and they lived not in palaces, but in memory, in mystery. Who were they? That question, even now, is difficult to answer with certainty. The Romans recorded their own impressions, some exaggerated, some distorted by conquest, but what little we know paints a picture both fascinating and unclear. The Druids were priests, judges, philosophers, astronomers, and poets all at once. They held no swords, yet kings bowed to them. They left behind no books, yet they shaped generations. To become a Druid was not simple. It could take 20 years of oral training, memorizing verses, laws, cosmology, herbal knowledge, and rituals. not from scrolls, but from mouths, passed from elder to youth in quiet hours beneath oak branches. The oak tree, in fact, was central to their world, strong, enduring, and sacred. Mistletoe, especially when found growing on oak, was revered, harvested with golden sickles, and used in ceremonies believed to bring fertility or protection. Livestock might be passed through sacred fires, water drawn only under moonlight. They held ceremonies in forest clearings, by standing stones or flowing streams. To a druid, the land was alive. Rivers had names, hills had spirits, time itself was cyclical, tied to the sun, the moon, and the stars above. The druids held enormous social power. They could settle disputes, bless or curse leaders, banish offenders from rituals or punishment that, in some cases, meant effective exile from society. Without druidic sanction, a chief might lose legitimacy. Without their words, even war could not begin. But with this power came danger. When Julius Caesar began his campaign into Gaul, he recognized something quickly. The druids were not merely religious figures, they were political ones. They connected the tribes across Gaul. They carried wisdom across valleys and mountains. In a land with no capital, they were the thread. And so, he sought to sever it. Druidic practices were outlawed under Roman rule. Sacred groves were cut down. Rituals were banned. The practice of oral transmission, so resistant to Roman administration, was viewed with suspicion, and slowly the druids vanished. Not all at once. Some fled to the corners of the Celtic world, into Britain, into Ireland, where fragments of their ways would endure a little longer. But in Gaul, they faded, not in blood, but in silence. Today, the groves are quiet still. The mistletoe grows unnoticed. The sacred fires are cold. Yet here and there, scattered across the land, traces remain, a carving here, a name of a river there, a calendar etched in bronze. And in those places, when the wind rustles the old oak leaves, it is tempting to believe that the druids have not vanished entirely, just retreated deeper into the forest. Segment 4. Roman villas in a conquered Gaul. Now, imagine the same hills, the same forests and rivers. But time has moved forward. The war horns are quiet. The sacred groves have been cleared. The tribes have bent to Rome. And in their place, new sounds have risen: soft footsteps on tile floors, the splashing of water in courtyards, the slow hum of a Roman life transplanted into Gaulish soil. Let us walk now not in the village of a woodsman, not into a battlefield or a druid's grove, but into a villa, a Roman villa, nestled in what had once been untamed Gaul. Perhaps you were the steward of the estate, or a house servant, waking early to light the braziers. Perhaps you were simply a guest, passing through. The villa is spacious, elegant, and distinctly Roman. Long colonnades stretch out into small gardens, peristyles, shaded and green, where vines curl lazily up whitewashed walls. The floors are covered in mosaics, laid with care, geometric patterns, mythological scenes, or waves, frozen in glassy stone. Some floors are heated by Hippocos' underfloor heating system, where warm air flows through hollowed bricks. Outside, the villa commands the landscape. Orchards stretch down the slope. Olive trees, perhaps, rows of grapevines, the sound of livestock drifting from distant pens. You can hear a fountain trickle in the atrium. Birds rest on the tiled roof. The owner, a Romanized Gaul or perhaps a patrician from Italy, lives a life steeped in both worlds. His children speak Latin, but his servants speak old tribal tongues. His dining room, the triclinium, is decorated with imported marble and bronze lamps. But behind the villa, the kitchen is staffed by men and women who still mark the solstices by the old calendar. Lunch is modest bread, cheese, figs, and garum, the fermented fish sauce that wafts through every Roman household. Wine is diluted with water. Meals are taken reclining, on cushions, with oil lamps flickering nearby. But beneath this quiet surface lies a different story. These villas were not mere homes. They were symbols of conquest, of assimilation, of a new order. Where once there were tribal halls and thatched huts, now there stood porticos and baths. Where once the chieftain ruled by druidic law, now came landowners with Roman titles, taxes, and deeds. And while many Gauls remained in simple huts outside the villa's reach, their children saw marble statues where once there were wooden idols. They learned to read Roman letters, to worship Roman gods, to adopt Roman customs, until they no longer remembered where one world ended and the other began. Still, not all changed at once. Even in the most Romanized villas, echoes of the old ways remained. Offerings were still left at springs. Protective charms still hung above doors, and in the quiet hours of the morning, when the dew sat heavy on the fields, some still whispered prayers in the tongue their ancestors once spoke to the groves. This was Gaul, now conquered, but not entirely erased. And so, the villa stands, a quiet monument to the slow tide of empire, to the stillness after the storm, and to the complex, gentle, almost invisible work of cultural transformation. And so, we return from the forests, the battlefields, the sacred groves, and the silent villas. You have walked through the daily toils of a woodsman in ancient Gaul, where cold mornings and smoky nights shaped a life of quiet endurance. You stood beside a warrior king Vercingetorix whose dream of unity flickered. Briefly before the overwhelming march of empire, you stepped softly into the forgotten world of the Druids, where trees held memory, and wisdom lived in whispered chants. And finally, you wandered through a Roman villa, where marble and mosaic gently replaced the old world, never quite erasing it, only layering over it. Gaul was never truly one place. It was many interwoven by language, belief, and land. It was a place of transition, from tribe to nation, from oral tradition to written law, from mystery to administration. And though time has pushed those people far from us, though their voices have faded and their names have worn smooth, we carry echoes of them still. In roads that follow ancient paths, in rivers that still bear their ancient names, in stories that lingered just long enough to dream by. So now, let the past settle like dust. Let the sounds of galaxies on wood, sandals in the corridor, whispers beneath oak leaves fade into a soft hush. You are not in a roundhouse now. You are not hunted, not cold. The world outside is calm. The room is still. Breathe in and out and drift. You've journeyed through ancient Gaul, and now the past can sleep, and so can you.
The hour grows late. The lamplighters in Prague have long since vanished into the alleys, and the cobbled squares are damp with mist. The stones beneath your feet remember stories older than the name of the country that holds them. Before it was the Czech Republic, before even Czechoslovakia, there was Bohemia, a kingdom inside an empire. A land of scholars and soldiers, of gold-gleaming cathedrals, and fires lit for more than warmth. Tonight, we step back into its winding streets. We walk beneath the ticking shadow of its famous clock, past cloisters and brothels, workshops and towers. This was not a quiet kingdom. Bohemia burned with questions long before anyone had answers. Its thinkers spoke too loudly. Its kings dreamed too grandly. Its people, too often, stood just a little too tall. And yet, amid all the unrest, there was also beauty, a city of bells and beer, of ink-stained parchment, and of revolutions whispered behind carved doors. Let us begin, then, not with royalty or war, but with the soft clatter of wooden barrels and the hiss of boiling wort in a narrow alley behind the tavern, where you, unfortunately, have just started your shift. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in Prague's old town. It is early morning in 15th century Prague, but you are already sweating. The air smells of smoke, spoiled grain, and warm, yeasty steam that rises from the tavern's rear chamber. You are a brewer's apprentice, one of many young men working in the back streets of the old town, shoveling coal, cleaning casks, and hauling barrels. That weigh nearly as much as you do. The tavern opens before sunrise, and you must make the morning ale ready, thinner, cheaper, brewed quickly to quench the thirst of laborers who fill the square by midday. The beer is cloudy, barely fermented, and often flavored with strange herbs or dried berries to mask the fact that the water it was made with was never truly clean. Your hands are raw from scrubbing, the wooden tools are warped, and the rats have made themselves regular guests. There are no health inspectors, no refrigeration, no gloves. There is only routine. On some days, the barrels are too sour or explode from pressure, and you are blamed. You still owe your master another 6 months of labor before your name can even be attached to the product. On other mornings, the church bells ring unexpectedly. A tax collector has arrived. The crown takes its share, not always. Worse still are the street fires. The houses here are close, built mostly of wood, and if one catches from a careless hearth or a thief's torch, you may lose your corner of the city by sunset. But people carry on. The fish sellers still shout through the square. The university students still argue in Latin behind their cloaks. And your master reminds you, again and again, that brewing is noble work. You feed the city, he says. But at night, when your back aches and the scent of malt clings to your skin, you dream of something else. Of books, maybe. Of travel. Of having enough coin to walk into a tavern and order a drink instead of making it. For now, you carry another pail. You try not to slip, and you hope that the fires tonight spare your alley. You wouldn't last a day. And yet, here you are, still upright, still breathing, still part of a kingdom whose streets echo with far more than footsteps. Segment 2, Jan Hus and the Bonfire of Belief. Let us leave the smell of barley mash and charcoal behind now. Let the narrow alleys of the old town fade into quieter halls. Stone replaces timber, ink replaces ale, and the voices you hear are no longer the rowdy cries of market folk, but the measured cadence of lectures echoing through vaulted chambers. It is the year 1402, and here, inside the walls of Charles University, a man stands at a pulpit carved of ash and adorned with dust. His name is Jan Hus. His eyes are dark and steady, his robes simple, his check spoken boldly, not in the Latin preferred by Rome, draws the attention of merchants, students, even nobles. He does not shout. He does not command. Instead, he reasons with calm certainty. Hus questions things that had long gone unquestioned. Why does the church sell indulgences like market wares? Why must sermons be spoken in Latin, unreadable to the people? Why do princes feast while the poor starve beneath cathedral shadows? At first, his words stir only quiet murmurs. Then, fierce loyalty. He preaches not against faith, but for return to it, to the teachings of Christ, stripped of gold and corruption. Too many in Bohemia. His voice is not dangerous, it is necessary. But to the men in distant Rome and Avignon, it is something else. A crack in the marble, a whisper that could become a storm. And so, they summon him. In 1415, Hus travels to the Council of Constance under the protection of a promised safe conduct. He arrives quietly. He writes letters. He prays. He is arrested anyway. The prison is damp. There is no trial in the sense he might have hope. Only demands. Only silence. If he will not recant. He does not recant. They burn him on a summer day. His ashes are cast into the Rhine. But the fire does not end him. Back in Bohemia, his name becomes a banner. His followers, called Hussites, take up weapons, not out of hunger for conquest, but because they believe truth has been murdered. The Hussite wars will rage for decades. Bohemia will tear itself in two, again and again. And yet, in the center of it all, there remains the memory of the quiet preacher, a man who stood in his robes, hands folded, and simply said, "We must live by conscience." Today, in Prague, you can still stand at the base of the statue, where pigeons settle on his shoulders and flowers are left in silence. No fanfare, no banners, only the faint echo of a voice that refused to bend. Segment 3, the astronomical clock and the alchemists, and now the city breathes slower. Night is deepened, the lanterns are dim, and the sky is cloudless above Prague's ancient rooftops. You find yourself wandering again, drawn not by hunger, not by duty, but by curiosity. Turn a corner. Follow the echo of hooves on stone. There in the quiet square, it waits for you. The astronomical clock, built into the south wall of the old town hall. Its surface gleams faintly in the moonlight. Gold leaf clings to iron hands. Celestial symbols arc across the dial. It does not simply tell the hour. It marks the movements of the heavens, the sun, the moon, the signs of the zodiac, all shifting in slow, deliberate rhythm. It is not just a machine. It is an idea, one built when the world believed the cosmos could be understood, if one only measured it finely enough. It was completed in the early 1400s, at a time when Prague did not know what it would become. A capital, a battlefield, a haven for scholars. The clockmaker's name was Mikulak of Kadak, though others would add to his work. They say his hands never stopped trembling once it was done, as if he had brushed close to something divine. Some whispered that the city blinded him so he could never build another, but that is likely just a tale told to tourists now. Still, the stories persist, and those stories are not limited to clocks. Not far from here, behind heavy wooden doors, alchemists once worked by candlelight. The Emperor Rudolph II, in the late 1500s, invited them from across Europe. He filled his court not with soldiers or dancers, but with thinkers. Some are mystics, some are frauds, some genuine seekers of truth. They came with flasks, with strange powders, and with diagrams of circles within circles, claiming they could transmute lead into gold or create life in miniature glass jars. It was not merely science. It was not merely sorcery. It was hope, wrapped in calculation and candle smoke. The Golden Lane near Prague Castle still holds their tiny rooms, low ceilings, narrow beds, walls stained with old secrets. People feared them, respected them, and occasionally imprisoned them. But they were not fools. They were dreamers who believed the universe might be persuaded to reveal its deepest shapes if one simply listened carefully enough. Much like the clock, they tried to understand the movement of all things with mathematics, with metaphor, with mercury and willpower. So here we are, in a city where time was told not just with bells, but with stars. A place where the line between science and magic was blurred by candlelight and royal patronage. And even now, if you walk those streets at midnight, you may feel it. That soft hum beneath the stones, as if the past is still ticking, slow and eternal. Segment 4. The Feasting Kings of Bohemia. There are no furnaces stoked in this part of the city. No rats in barrels. No ink-stained heretics debating beneath low ceilings. Here, the walls are lined with velvet and gold thread, and the air carries the scent of roasted game and beeswax. Welcome to the court of the Bohemian kings. Let your footsteps fall more gently here. The floors are swept, the windows high, and a servant silent and slippered will remove the dust of the streets from your cloak before you even reach the outer hall. This is Prague Castle, sometime in the late 15th or early 16th century. The city below may still murmur with turmoil and trade, but within these walls, life flows at a different rhythm, a slower one, a grander one. You are not a brewer's apprentice now. You are an observer in the company of nobility. At the center of it all sits the king, perhaps Vladislaus II, his posture refined, his beard delicately scented with clove oil. His crown is not always worn, but his presence alone reminds those around him that he rules not just a kingdom, but the symbols that define it. The court is not merely a place of governance. It is a performance, a slow ballet of etiquette, politics, and carefully timed glances. Meals are spectacles. Large tables groan beneath platters of venison, duck, pears soaked in wine, and delicate sweets shaped like animals or castles. Wine flows, but only from the correct regions. Moravian if the king is pleased. Hungarian if he is not. The feast may stretch for hours, punctuated by lutes, soft-voiced poets, or a demonstration of falcons unhooded in the courtyard beyond. But even here, among painted ceilings and measured laughter, there is calculation. Each seat at the table is a signal. Each word whispered behind a goblet carries weight. Alliances are not forged in the battlefield alone. Sometimes they're coaxed into existence between bites of roast pheasant and murmured verses. To serve in court was to observe the dance and to master stillness. To speak boldly was to risk exile. To speak not at all was to be forgotten. And yet, amid all this theater, there were small comforts. Fires that never burned to low. Tapestries that softened every echo. Books illuminated and locked, lining chambers where even kings came to think alone. For all the grandeur, for all the marble and silver, these kings were still Bohemian, still born of a land that had known both rebellion and reverence. When the feast ends, candles are carried through the halls like stars. The echo of laughter fades. The corridors stretch into silence. And somewhere perhaps in a private room high in the tower, the king leans out a window, looking down on a city still alight with small fires and softer lives. The candle has burned low now, the fire down to embers. The bells of Prague strike midnight slow, deep and distant. You are far from the alleys, far from the roaring taverns and echoing cathedrals. You are in the quiet part of memory. Bohemia never fully vanished. It did not collapse so much as dissolve. Its name gently folded into empires and republics. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear it breathing beneath the modern streets. The beat of a cooper's hammer, the low chant of a university mass, the hush in a hidden study where someone, somewhere, still tries to turn lead into gold. You've walked a long road tonight, from the sweat-slick floors of a brewer's shop, to the echo of flames consuming a man's beliefs, to the intricate ticks of a clock that does not forget, to the polished halls where kings weighed words like jewels. Bohemia was never simple. It was not made for bedtime stories. It held rebellions and contradictions and truths too sharp to swallow in one sitting. And yet, when viewed from above, from a high tower at dusk, or a mountaintop after snowfall, the kingdom takes on a different shape, one of resilience, of minds that questioned, of people who endured. It was a place where theology could topple thrones, and where gold might shimmer in a bowl just as easily as in a thought. So now, let your breathing settle. Let your thoughts drift softly through arches and gardens, libraries and kitchens. Let the flickering images of the past fade gently into shadow. The city is sleeping. The river is still. The stars have moved. But they will be back. And you have wandered far. But you are home again now. Home beneath the quiet sky of old Bohemia. Good night, traveler. Rest well. And may your dreams remember things the waking world forgets.